Hey guys, and welcome back to the Nomad Millionaire. Today we'll be looking at the emerging crisis of student loans in the UK. It is a well-known fact that student loans are a huge problem in the US. And what we're actually seeing now, it's becoming an even bigger problem in the UK than the US, even though most people are not talking about it. And so we thought it'd be interesting just to compile the data. And in this, I'll actually ask, I'm from Denmark, but I'll ask a UK Ryan. He's living at the outskirts of London, and he doesn't know the data that I've found. Does he actually know how bad it is? And then I'll ask him some questions around what's actually going on in the UK at the moment, as we're seeing so much happening. So, are you ready for it, Ryan?
Bring it on.
So, guys, there is a link in the article in the YouTube video here where you can see the actual study. So you can follow along as well here if you want to see the data behind it. And again, there's no manipulation here. We're just giving you as it is for your own interpretation as well. We are just trying to outline that there might be a problem coming. We actually think it's a tsunami coming, but for you, you can of course make your own judgment calls. First of all, Ryan, I want to ask you, how many do you think of the students today are financing their education with a student loan?
From what I would say, probably I'd guess maybe 40%, 45%.
It's not 45%. Let me be it. It's actually 97% are financing the studies now with a student loan. That's insane.
90%.
Right? That's insane. So the problem we are trying to outline here is not for a small percentage or like it's only some. No. It is like majority of students. If we go back 40 years, it was only 28%. And the thing is here, what we've seen is, and we've outlined this in other videos, and Ryan, you've been paying attention to this as well, right, is that back in the day, you could actually argue why it was a good idea to actually go into debt to get education, because the disparity between your income was so high, whether or not you actually got that education or not. And back then, what we also were seeing is that the salary could buy a lot more than it could today. So what we've seen is, of course, that asset prices have continued to rise much faster than salaries. Living costs, housing costs have continued to rise so much faster than salaries. So you actually going into debt to get a salary afterwards, it's gotten worse and worse. Even though what we're seeing is that more and more people are actually doing that. So the numbers are actually flipped. And what trend do we have coming up now, Ryan, right? What trend do we have coming up? We have the AI trend that is going to put even more pressure on what we think of as the student sort of loan generation, if you can call it like that, on the salaries there. And sort of like this could actually be an emerging crisis that we have to slow down somehow. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, you can already see it in the numbers and what you're saying. The wage to the power of your money from back in the 80s right the way through to today is completely different. On top of that, the idea of a knowledge worker, which is essentially someone with a university degree who now works in a company and uses maybe a computer, for example, is becoming harder and harder to get those jobs.
Yeah.
So it's the value of the degree is actually going down.
Yeah, it's insane. Like when you actually think about it, just the fact that people are taking on so much more debt today for education that is only declining in value goes against all principles of why you should take on debt for anything. Now, is there a lot of prestige in the UK around going into these clearly fancy places? So you take on a lot of debt, or what's the situation in the UK? Because that's different to Denmark, where I come from, where students are being paid to be students. So we don't have a student loan problem in Denmark. We still have student loans, but not as big of a problem as we actually have in the UK, because you get paid to take an education.
Yeah, so in the UK, it's always been seen as quite a prestigious or clever or very smart thing to do to go to university. Sometimes, being the first one in your family to go to university is a huge achievement. It takes a lot of education. You have to work really hard to get the grades to get into these universities as well. And there's a particular group, I think it's called the Russell Group, and they actually have a collection of sort of, I think maybe the top 10, top 25 universities. And then we also have obviously the Oxfords of the world and the Cambridges. And to get into any of those universities, you are guaranteed a very high paying job after the fact, or at least a route into a career that could pay you really high later.
Yeah.
Now, so it's the idea of a university degree it's becoming a bit more of a commodity now. Anyone is getting a university degree as long as they're able to sort of pay the financing or get the student loan. So that the people who are then getting the good jobs are not always the ones that have, the best university degree from the best university. It's actually those who are educating themselves in all other kinds of ways. Now you need a degree, and you need a side hustle, and you need to have done other courses, and you need to have started your own little project to encourage people to get on that interview ladder or get that internship. It's more now than just a piece of paper for you to get the job.
Yeah, and what we are just seeing in general is, and we'll go further on to the next statistic here. So first of all, now we've outlined 97% are financing their students. So we just know the massive amount of people who are doing this. Essentially everyone. There might be a small percentage of sort of the rich kids of the UK where the parents are paying for it, and then the discussion is different whether or not you go to college or university, depending on what you call it. But of course, there might be some social things you get from it. There might be all sorts of other things that is not hardcore financial things. And we won't put them to work here. We're just looking at from a financial perspective. Should you go into debt to get this education? And the clear answer is no, even though 97% is doing it. But let's have a look. And especially because a lot of them, the social sciences today will continue to decline in value in a continuous AI world. There's just no denying that will come under pressure. And we're already seeing that, right? I read a study here the other day, and that's actually in the US, but the demand for computer scientists are 30% above. There's 30% more computer scientists than needed right now, which is insane, right? Because in 2021, we essentially lacked them. So this just goes to show how AI is already affecting those types of jobs, the information-based jobs, and will probably only continue to get worse.
Well, it's become essentially a bit of a pendulum effect, because this whole tech AI, this whole wave happened, let's say, mid 2000, from 2005 to 2020, right? We've been in a real sort of tech bubble boom. So the people with those computer science degrees or high level mathematic degrees that become engineers through that sort of degree pathway were in short supply, because the universities hadn't even caught up to offer things like computer science degrees. And then it wasn't until now the new kids on the block of going through these degrees in 2015 to 2025 now, they're coming out the other side with all these degrees and all these qualifications, because that was where all the money was.
Yeah.
And now it's being eroded essentially, because there's an over saturation of these people with these degrees, and then AI is kind of coming in and also cutting down how many engineers are actually needed. So to get an internship for a software engineer now is becoming even harder, even if you have the degree.
And that's the thing here, right? There's this thing, okay, as long as I do this, as long as I take a good education, I will be fine. It doesn't matter how much depth I go into it. And that might be true if you work as a computer scientist in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. Nope. Everybody thought, that's the safe thing to do. That's the new doctor to do, right? Because technology is only moving one forward, and we're going to need more engineers in the future. That was at least the expectation. And in 2021, you couldn't get one, right? So essentially what seemed like the most safest job was suddenly the most unsafest one, or turning into one of the most unsafest one. And that just goes to show, right, that we don't know. So when we're taking on debt, we always have to look at the risk behind it as well. It doesn't matter what kind of debt. There's nothing that is a certain thing. So just because it used to be that way, it can suddenly change. And AI is a great example of that. So we want people to take a step back before they actually go into debt to realize, is this actually a sensible thing? What kind of risk am I taking on the other side of the equation here? Or what kind of life am I actually signing up for? Now, the next question I want to go into, right, is because we of course know now that 97% of people that go into higher education in the UK actually take on student loans. Now, at the same time, there's been an expansion of people going into higher education. So not only are more people, and so we suddenly have a generation here where and do you know how many today in the UK is taking a higher education?
I would say maybe, 30%, 35%.
And it's actually higher as well, but you're closer here. It's around 50 to 60% today. It doesn't know the exact numbers here, but around 50 to 60% are taking a higher education. And 97% of those are going into student loans. I will come into how much loans they have and stuff like that later. But it just means we're creating essentially just a society of debt payers. Right? That's what's starting to happen now, right? Because if 97% takes on student loans and most people go into higher education, it just means basically the whole younger generation in the UK are now going into debt. And that will have ramifications later on.
And isn't it crazy, Jacob, that at the age of 18, you are told to make a decision that will cripple you financially, or maybe not cripple you, but it will definitely put you in a bad position financially and set you up for a bad position for the next 30. And now they're actually increasing it to 40 years
And that's the insane
to pay
thing
back
here,
that
right?
student loan.
That's the insane thing. And it's a good point you mentioned there, is that because the government can see people can't pay these things back in time, what they've tried to do now is extend and extend and extend the amount of time people have to pay back. Because, otherwise they just have to default on their loans, and student loans are not bankruptable, so they follow you for the rest of your life, no matter what. But so when you're suddenly looking at, okay, you finish education at the age of 25, 26, let's just take as examples here. And then okay, now you have a 40-year repayment period. And that's actually what we are here today to show you, that don't keep this around as a pet to have. Get rid of it as fast as possible if you're in the situation that you actually got into this. And because you don't want it for 40 years where you constantly think about it, you have to plan for it. It's not going to take a lot of financial upside away from you. It's also going to take a lot of freedom away from you to feel that you have this thing hanging around your neck for so long. So that's a great point you made there with the 40 years repayment means something's wrong.
It's essentially become a postgraduate tax that has been lumped onto every person that's taken higher education that now has to pay that back.
Yeah.
Almost double, maybe even triple the amount that they've taken out.
And remember, that's for people today, Ryan, right? It's essentially for people going into debt longer ago that is now in trouble. And today it's much worse. And we're still seeing this disparity between housing costs and salary continue an upward trend, which just means this is only getting worse and worse and worse, to the point where you'll just die with student loans.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the wage gap is just not increasing enough for people to pay that off and have a home and start a family. So there's this weird crunch, this squeeze that's happening to the middle class and also the students that are coming through.
It's another thing. It's another tax on the working class they're putting on themselves. So not only are they finding all these other things of extra housing costs, in general increasing taxes, extra cost on anything, asset price continue to rise, and then at the same time have student loans to pay off. You're setting people up for failure before they even started. And that's a huge issue here as well. So two things we conclude now. 97% people go into it and almost 60% take on higher education, which means in general 57% of the UK population, the younger generation, are going into debt to get education. So we know those two numbers now. Then the thing we also want to look at is how bad it actually is in the UK versus any other place. And for those of you who are following the graph, guys, you can see it, because I was always under the impression that the US are the crazy ones. Now I come from Denmark, where education is vastly different. It's a different debate when you get paid to go to school versus you have to take on debt. It just changes the math equation. It changes how you should look at it. It changes whether or not you should do it. For most people, that's just the reality of the situation. But the crazy thing is here that the average person in the UK today with a student loan have £36,000 in student loans. £36,000. Now, it's the highest in the world by a margin. 20% higher than the second highest, which is US. And those are the only two really outliers. From there, it actually goes quite fast down. So the UK is just another example here where UK somehow have turned themselves completely upside down. And if you're indebting sort of like the entire young generation of the UK now, who is going to sustain this society? Who's going to buy all the things? Who's going to continue to buy the properties later on? Like, the society of UK is another example here where it's turning itself upside down. And if the young generation is starting to lose hope here as well, because they are starting, and we're seeing articles now on BBC after doing this research, of people starting to realize that they'll be 70 before they pay it off. And when you are when you start to realize that, you won't spend as much money, you won't thrive as much, you won't have as much excitement in life, and that will all take things down. And when you have that in an entire generation, what you'll see is a collapse of UK. Right? So if nothing happens here, this is another sign of a collapse of UK. And of course, this is only looking from the data. Now we're going to ask a UK, which is probably more, which is more in line to actually ask this question is, it does seem like another brick in a puzzle that's about to collapse for UK. Do you agree on that, Ryan?
It's definitely going that way for sure. it's definitely heading towards a something. It's hard to really wrap our heads around what exactly, but if people can't get educated in a way that's going to not put them into crippling amounts of debt, if people can't buy houses, if people can't start families, there's going to be something's got to break, or some drastic decisions have to be made by those people.
That's probably why Gary Stevens, everybody knows, of course, him in the UK now, as he's just taking off with his whole thing of taxing the rich, and that's the way out. And essentially saying, there's no working class anymore. Either you are on the poor side or the rich side. And, most people are, of course, finding themselves on the wrong side of that equation, as that's how society are sort of linked up. But with the average one having £36,000, I think people have to, there's debate here. Should you just be like, you have to go very individual here and realize you have to solve the problem. Like this thing of us actually sitting here and explaining the large, big problems for most people that we're seeing here means you as an individual can still change. You still have actions you can actually do. And I think that's essentially what we want to let you know as well, is that even though your situation might be dire, there is a best move to make in the situation. And we are here to help you find that best move, right? Find that best thing where you realize, okay, if I actually do this for a period of time, it might actually help. Now, the good thing, Ryan, that we are here is that people are going into debt to at least have an education.
Yeah.
So there is certain things you got for the money, and it's just about using that to the maximum, right, to pay it off as fast as possible, and suddenly starting to get into the wealth accumulation instead and join the capital class and not be in the working class anymore, which is a longer time frame for people that are, of course, in this situation. But that is a key, right? They actually got an education, and it's just up for them to use it to the best of abilities.
I think something to also mention is they are moving into a world where they can take advantage of remote working. They can take advantage of location independence. They can take advantage of all these new companies that are being started. With that now university education that they have, they can marry the two and create a whole new life for themselves, which previous generations who went to university could not do that.
Correct. So that what we're essentially saying here is that they have new possibilities. They just have to take them and realize they can't do the same as the older generation did. They have to come up with a new strategy that works in 2025, right? And that just doesn't go for anyone who's looking at UK. That goes for anyone. Like the reason why we tend to take a lot of examples from the UK just here because we realize the UK is also where the most student loan debt is. So not only do they have all these other problems, that is also a huge problem. So of course it's easy to sit there and point fingers at that. But of course it's a trend we're seeing across all societies, what we're seeing here, that really the society is being split up into two different groups, and you have to realize what kind of group you want to be in longer term. With AI coming, you might have to speed up things faster than what you thought maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So there's still some other data here we have to look at, right? Because the one thing is 97% go in, the average is £37. Now, most people, of course, have between 0 and £40,000. And if you're in that group, it is manageable. Essentially comes up to you learning to budget and realizing how fast you also want to get up, right? So rice and beans, beans and rice, as Dave Ramsey says for quite a few years here. If you have that kind of debt, will get you there. Now, the problem is, of course, if you start to get into the thing of 100 plus or 40 to or 50 to 100,000 pounds, let's put that, which 1.9 million people in Britain today are sitting on between 50 and 100,000 pounds, then you need to get a little bit more worried what's going on. You need to be a bit more aggressive in your thinking to not actually just be in a continuous cycle of never actually being able to pay it off, because the interest is just working a bit more against you, and we don't know what's happening with inflation and all these things in society. So there you really have to pay attention. And then we of course have the outliers that have 100,000 pounds or more, and we even have people at 200,000 pounds or more. Now, not that many in the UK is actually there. So what we're seeing in the US, more people go into these crazy amounts of debt, which we're not seeing as much in the UK. In the UK, it's much more that most people just go into debt to get the education and sort of landing there. But we don't see the same type of outliers as we're seeing in the US, where some people graduate with $1 million in debt. That's not happening in the UK, and luckily for that. So what we want to do now, Ryan, is to show an example we had in here of people that realized this and that were trying their very hardest to actually pay off the debt in the UK, and realizing, okay, there is a level of pain tolerance here where you get to a point where you start to look at this. And what we want people to then realize is you play it out and be like, okay, I actually don't want to do this for 10 years. I want to do it faster. And the couple we're going to look at here did that. So, they both had good jobs living in the UK. And what they realized was also before they even started looking at, the Nomad Millionaire steps was to actually, how could they do this much faster? They're both very well educated, both had good jobs, and they were already now at a savings rate of 36% in the UK, which is some of the best we're seeing. So which means they're already living, not paycheck to paycheck, but they're already living, as humble as they could. Our point is, if you actually do that in the early stages, you'll be fine here, right? Because if you actually just be like, okay, I won't have a life, I'll live like I did when I was actually studying the next 5 years as well. We both got out good jobs. People tend to get 2 cars, a house, certain things. If they can wait with that and actually just go aggressive to say, no, for 3 or 4 years, I'm just paying off debt, they will still be fine. But it comes down to the pain tolerance and not actually realizing when you get out of studies, now you think you have to spend. No, now you actually have to save. So it's the reverse of what most people are, of course, doing. But that couple managed to move from London, outskirts of London, to Malaysia, even with £150,000 in student loans. And they are still on a trajectory now to pay it off in a year. And what we want to do with that is to show you there is much more hope than what you realize. There's much more hope than what you realize. You just have to really look at the situation you're in, realize where you are, and then make the move that makes the most sense for you. And just be like, okay, for a couple of years here, all I'm going to think about is positioning myself to win. And so, honey, we are not doing that right now. We're not going on those travels. We're not doing this in this period of time in our life. We're just paying off debt. People around us might be crazy, think we're crazy. Our parents might think, what are you guys doing? You have a lot of time to pay it up. No, we are getting rid of it now. And that is, for those of you who feel that energy, you'll be fine. It's the bit more the sloppy ones who are a bit thinking of it, it's fine, we'll figure it out down the line. Those are the ones who tend to get into trouble because it goes to show a discipline that is not there, and you don't learn about money early enough that you're actually going to win with it. So you'll tend to see those types of people also accumulating other types of debts, other types of consumer debts over time to pay off the other interests. And so this video is highly not just for you to actually realize how dire the situation is, but realizing you still have a choice. You might have made a mistake in the past. We all have. You might have made a mistake of going into debt. We all did that. The key is you can still do something today to change the situation. And that's the important part here. And we certainly hope that that's the case in the UK as well, right? And Ryan, you're meeting a lot of those every day still there, that even though you're young, you might be in debt, you still have hope. Correct?
Yeah, for sure. And I think hearing of all these other opportunities or ways to speed up the process to pay off debt is a whole experience in learning itself. It's a whole new perspective on how to look at the world and how to approach your financial situation.
Yeah.